Good morning, everyone from the World Health Organization headquarters in Geneva. My name is Alexandra Kuzmanovic, and this morning I have a great pleasure to talk to our chief scientist, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, and our Assistant Director General for Access to Medicines, Vaccines, and Pharmaceuticals, Dr. Maria Angela Simao. Good morning, Dr. Soumya, and good morning, Dr. Maria Angela. We are 8 months in the COVID-19 pandemic, and WHO has put strong efforts in convening countries and partners within the Accelerator initiative. Can you please explain to our viewers what is the Accelerator? Dr. Soumya, do we hear you? Or Dr. Maria Angela, we are connecting remotely today. Here we are. We have, good morning, Dr. Maria Angela. How are you?
Good morning, good afternoon for those who are already on another time zone. And it's a pleasure to be talking to you today, and we'll try to make a lively conversation and try to bring some information to you that will help to understand the context that we are living in.
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me? There is
Yes.
someone who
Yes.
just that they can't hear me. I'm sorry.
Okay, I can't hear anything.
Okay. Dr. Soumya cannot hear anything, so there's some glitch on our side. So I'll continue
for that.
Right? Okay. Okay, can I continue?
Yes, please.
Yes. So apologies for the interruption. We are still learning to live with these virtual interactions, and we are getting better, and the platforms are getting better too, but it's still not the same thing, right? So what is the Accelerator? In April this year, where it was very, very clear since the beginning of this pandemic that the world need a much more collaborative space to make sure that we could speed up the research and development of tools that would help to conquer, to address this pandemic, to address the SARS-CoV-2 virus and the huge impact it's having in the world. But at the same time that it would ensure that we had what we call an end-to-end process, that whatever you put on the pipeline of the research and development, that these tools, at the end of the day, when they are ready, they are available for real people at country level. That's what we call the end-to-end. So this Accelerator was formed through a coalition of global and international organizations, was fundamental in putting this together. WHO today hosts the coordination hub. There are several organizations that are partners with us, depending on each area. And one of the questions that would come up is, what does it do actually, right? We say we are working with 4 pillars, right? One is focusing on vaccines, and we can speak a little bit about each one of them, right? Like I said, vaccines from the research and development part until we have the regulatory issues and the acceptance at country level, and that in due time we'll have immunizations campaign happening at country level. There's another pillar on the therapeutics. Which are the drugs, because there are lots, more than 1,700 trials going on with around 200 drugs, medicines, to some old and some new, to treat this virus. So there's the therapeutics pillar, and the diagnostics pillar, which is also, because it's a new virus, we needed the first test that was available is a test that's very complicated because it has to use the swab. It's a PCR test. It has to be done in a specialized lab, right? So it's not an easy to scale up, and we needed to invest a lot on the research and development of tests that are easier to be used by health workers, be at a hospital or at at the health center level. And then there's a fourth pillar that's called the health system connector, because in order to have all these pieces working when it comes to them being available at the local level, you need at national level, you need to have health systems that can work with these products and that have for example, the necessary inputs regarding like protective equipment that we call PPE for health workers, that you have masks, that you have all the gowns, everything that the health worker needs to protect himself, and also has the ventilators and oxygen meters to address patients who are hospitalized. So this is in a nutshell how this Accelerator is organized with 4 pillars, and WHO plays a role across all of these pillars. Back over, maybe Dr. Sumia wants to complement.
Good morning, Dr. Sumia. We're glad that we got you connected as well. Thank you for joining.
Good morning.
Would you maybe like to add what is the objective of this Accelerator initiative and how it will help us to save lives from COVID-19?
I think Mary Angela has talked a little bit about the Accelerator and how it's set up and who the partners are. You know, the idea was that in April, when this was conceptualized, was that you need to come together. Essentially, if every organization and every country tries to do this on their own, it's going to be long and hard and difficult, because there are strengths and weaknesses, and this challenge basically is a global challenge. And so you need the public sector, you need the private sector, you need the scientists and the academics, you need civil society, right? And you need, of course, resources. And as Mary Angela said, you know, the immediate needs are to be able to detect people. So you need diagnostics to be able to treat people so that you can save lives. And then in the medium term, you want a vaccine so that you can bring an end to this, reduce transmission, you know, make it much more manageable. And so this is when, you know, the concept of the act is basically a global coalition of institutions and countries coming together with, you know, WHO, of course, leading as a global health agency. But you have CEPI, which, you know, was set up basically to develop vaccines for diseases like this. You have Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, that has a long history of providing hundreds of millions of doses of vaccine to children all over the world. You have the Global Fund that's had a fantastic impact in reducing deaths due to HIV, TB, and malaria. You have UNITAID, which basically focuses on scaling up innovations. You have the World Bank, and then you have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that have been funding innovations and scaling manufacturing for a long time. So bringing all of these organizations together with, of course, the support of all our member states and the other stakeholders I mentioned. The private sector is very important. We cannot scale anything, whether it's a drug or a vaccine, without the private sector. And so you have the associations of the manufacturers of vaccines and drugs also, you know, joining in to this coalition. And there are 2 goals. The first one is to accelerate research and development, make it as fast as possible. Unprecedented speed and scale is what we're looking at, but also access. And I think we are very, very clear right from the beginning of this initiative. There is no point in developing new products and tools if you cannot distribute it around the world to people who need it, regardless of their ability to pay. And so really, these are the 2 goals, and that's really the mission of this whole enterprise. And we're now about 4 months into this. We've made tremendous progress in all these areas, in therapeutics and diagnostics, and as well as in vaccines, where things are really moving along very, very well. And so we hope that this would actually result in very concrete things that will benefit people. It's a very practical and a pragmatic exercise, not something which is just talk or theory.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sumia. I see that we're already receiving a lot of questions, but for those who are not sure how to ask their questions, On Twitter, please use the hashtag AskWHO. On LinkedIn or Facebook, leave your question via comment section. Dr. Soumya, you just mentioned that we are trying to speed up the process in developing these vital tools and also to ensure access. And one of our viewers just left a comment. If we do this process in a very fast way, are we missing to see some long-term effects or long-term side effects from these products?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is something that, I think everyone must understand, that just because we talk about speed and scale, it doesn't mean that we start compromising or cutting corners on what would normally be, a process. The process still has to follow the rules of the game, which is that you go through the process of clinical trials. And here, particularly, I'm talking about drugs and vaccines. Diagnostics has evaluation methodology. But for drugs and vaccines which are given to people, you have to test their safety, first and foremost, most important, and the efficacy. That is, how effective is the drug. If it's a drug in trying to reduce death, or a drug which is trying to reduce the need for oxygen or ventilation, that's what you need to test in a clinical trial. If it's a vaccine, you're looking at, can the vaccine really prevent people from getting the infection or prevent people from getting seriously ill if they get the infection compared to those who don't have the vaccine. And these clinical trials progress in stages. You start with a few people, usually a dozen or two, to test safety. Then you go into a few hundred people to look at both safety in a larger group and immunogenicity, which means how good is the immune response. And then you get into a phase 3 trial, which is done in tens of thousands of people, where you're really looking at how good is the protective response, and you're also looking for safety signals, rarer side effects. And then, even after the vaccine has met the benchmarks that have been set and it's been licensed, you still do something called post-marketing surveillance, pharmacovigilance, or safety monitoring, which is you continue to collect data on the safety of a new vaccine or a new drug for at least a couple of years after it's introduced. So there is a system in place, has been in place for a long time. This is what regulatory agencies follow, and this will be followed for these products as well. The way we try to shorten the timelines is by anticipating, doing things quickly, trying to harmonize efforts, especially between the regulators, and also putting lots of investment into manufacturing well ahead of the results of the trial. So normally a company would wait, see the results of the trial, then start scaling up. But here you're investing in advance, what's called at-risk investment, so that there are places around the world that can start manufacturing this as soon as even before the results are available, actually. And if the results are not good, well, that resource can be turned to doing something else. So that's how the timelines are being shortened, not by cutting short the actual testing of safety or efficacy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Soumya. Dr. Mariangela, you explained that the ACT Accelerator has a few pillars. So Covax is a pillar focusing on vaccines. How many countries are part of this pillar, and how can they join to be part of Covax and ACT Accelerator?
You see, because one of the big challenges we have, especially in the developing world, and we have the history of past pandemics like the H1N1 showed that the world didn't have access to the vaccine against the H1N1 on a timely fashion. Okay, we had the high-income countries, rich countries getting the vaccine first, and then when it came to distribute the vaccine to lower and middle income countries, the pandemic had already gone. The difference we had this time is that this pandemic's not going to go away anytime soon. That's what we have been seeing so far. Even you try to say, no, it's going to end now. It's not going to end soon. It will end one day. That it needs help, and we need to work towards it. I'm saying this why? Because we have WHO with Gavi and other partners are making a huge effort to ensure what we call equitable access to a vaccine, let's say. or therapeutics or diagnostics, but we're focusing in this moment on equitable access to a vaccine. What do we mean by that? We mean that countries in the north and the south, all countries who join an initiative that's the Covax facility. And right now we have, I think, 172 countries that have joined. They would have access to the vaccine on a timely manner. Everybody would, that next year we will have a vaccine that has proven, like Dr. Sonia said, that's both safe and that it works against the virus, right? What we call efficacious or effective. Once we have that vaccine, one or two vaccines, there won't be enough to vaccinate the entire world. So what we are aiming at, organizing with countries, joining a global facility that's hosted by the Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, is that countries will have access to the vaccines as they come into up to 20% of the population until the end of next year on a very timely basis. So we wouldn't have rich countries just getting it first and poorer countries getting after. We are working very hard. So like I said, 172 countries have joined this facility, trying to do a better job than we did in the past. Because all tools that work against COVID should be global public goods, right? Things that will benefit humanity. And this pandemic has shown us that no one is safe until everybody is safe. All countries. There's no country that will be able to not to have more cases while there are cases elsewhere, right? So we need what we're saying. We are working towards a global solution that gives the countries the best chances to access a safe, efficacious, and affordable vaccine when they become available.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mariangela. We got a question from our viewer on Twitter. Has WHO been able to lead or influence discussions with Gavi and vaccine manufacturers, as you mentioned, on access, but also on pricing?
You want to take it, Sonia? Should I?
Yeah, I can start. So yes, the Covax facility basically has been set up to be able to have that leverage because of the volumes that will be procured through the facility. As you know, the Covax facility is a pooling mechanism that will buy vaccines from manufacturers and supply them to countries. Both countries that are high-income countries that will pay for their own vaccines, as well as the countries which normally get Gavi support. So there are 92 countries which are low-income or low-middle income, or some of the very small countries, which will be supported through development aid. But there are at least 79 countries now that have expressed an interest, which are the upper middle income and high income countries that will buy. So once you have these commitments, you can make advanced purchasing commitments to companies, and that helps them to plan and also helps them then to scale the number of doses and to reduce the price accordingly. So that's usually the rule, that the more the volume you're buying, the better the price could be. The facility will obviously have entered into a lot of negotiations. And currently what we're hearing from the manufacturers, many of them, are that they either want to supply it at a not-for-profit basis, so just the cost price plus a little bit to cover their expenses. There are some manufacturers who have proposed a tiered pricing, so a lower pricing for the low-income countries, and then higher for the middle, and then higher for the high income. So there's that, and then the type of vaccine it also makes a difference. So there are some vaccines currently which could be in the range of a couple of dollars per dose, up to vaccines which are being priced at between $20 and $30 a dose. And this is dynamic. It will change as there are more vaccine candidates becoming available. The pricing is going to change, but we have to plan right for the beginning when there'll be limited candidates, limited choice. So yes, on the one hand, you have the push funding, which CEPI is doing, which is the R&D funding. So there's funding being invested into the research and development of candidates. On the other hand, you have the Gavi Covax facility, which is providing the pull funding providing the market commitments and the advance purchase commitments. So between these two, it should actually be able to bring vaccines to people at affordable price. And of course, most countries are thinking about how they will provide vaccines to their own citizens at a no cost or low cost or a cost sharing basis. So that's, country by country discussions also happening. Over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sumia. We have a new question from our LinkedIn viewer. What exactly are you doing to speed up research? Are you giving extra funds to specific institutes? And if yes, which ones?
So there are different models being followed to speed up research. And maybe Mary Angela can talk about on the therapeutic side, how the Gates Foundation and the partners, Unitaid and others are investing in both keeping track of what the new advances are, supporting some of the studies, but more importantly, planning ahead. So if there's a promising drug that's getting into clinical trials today, are we going to have enough doses available? Is there enough manufacturing capacity available to be able to provide it to people? For vaccines, it's something similar. As I said, there's advanced investments into research and development, which means, taking it through the lab studies, the animal studies, the human studies. There's a lot of investment in manufacturing because that is a significant portion of the vaccine cost is to scale. This is the first time that the world will need vaccines in the billions of doses. Currently, we mainly have a large childhood immunization program. We're talking about hundreds of millions of doses. Now we're suddenly talking about billions. And that kind of capacity doesn't exist in any one company. So new facilities have to be built. And existing ones need to be strengthened and expanded in order to have that kind of capacity. And it's the same for drugs as well. If you had an effective drug that saved lives, you would want hundreds of millions of doses of that drug or product to be available all over the world. And that is a big challenge, particularly for things like monoclonal antibodies, which are currently in clinical trials, but for which there's limited capacity in the developing world. So these are the kind of issues that these agencies within the ACT Accelerator are grappling with and trying to find solutions for.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sumia. Dr. Mary Angela, here is a question on therapeutics. What is the stage of drug trials? How will developing countries benefit from these drugs, or are they getting these? Is there a chance for them to get these drugs on fair pricing?
That's an excellent question and one that everybody should be asking. Thank you for the question. There are so many. You have two different types of drugs, right? When we are talking about the trials, you have drugs that already exist in the market for other purposes, and we call them as being repurposed. They're being studied for another reason, right? An example was, for example, the hydroxychloroquine, which is a malaria drug, and it was studied to see if it worked against COVID-19, against the SARS-CoV-2, and it showed it did not work, right? And we have drugs that are used for HIV that also showed that they did not work. And then we have new drugs, drugs that are being developed now, and Dr. Sumia just described that, like, for example, the monoclonal antibodies, which we call them biotherapeutics. There are some that are promising ones. They have some restrictions in use, for example, because most of them are injectable, right? So not everybody. It's even doing the trials with healthy patients is a challenge because people don't like to get injections, right? So they are promising drugs. Both drugs, we call them the usual pharmaceuticals that we use. We call them small molecules, right? There are a few promising drugs now on phase 3 trials with small molecules, and there are a few monoclonal antibodies, which are the biotherapeutics being developed for COVID, specifically for the virus or to boost the immune system. we have a lot of misinformation regarding the trials and the drugs that can be used. And WHO last week launched the guidelines on the use of corticosteroids, especially with an emphasis on dexamethasone, but not only on dexamethasone, because that this virus, it causes in the body a hyperimmune inflammatory reaction, and the corticosteroids, which are very strong anti-inflammatory drugs, they have been shown to be useful to decrease mortality in severe patients that are getting worse because of this hyperimmune response. So we have very few tools right now, but we have been seeing also very few tools that have proven to be effective. And like I'm citing dexamethasone and some other of the corticosteroids because WHO just launched the guidelines on this. But we are also seeing a situation where the intensive care units in many countries are learning how to manage better clinically the patients. Okay, so it using all the tools available. We have one specific drug that was a repurposed drug initially used to try to use for Ebola patients, which is remdesivir, who showed a small benefit in decreasing number of days in hospital. But we still do not have an antiviral that works specifically against this SARS-CoV-2. We will know by the end of the year which of these studies these studies that are ongoing. And let me explain something because it's very important. Sometimes people see a small study with 50 people, 60 people, and they think that's it. No, we are talking about very robust studies. We are talking about studies that analyze people who take the drug and compare them with people in the same situation who don't take the drug. We call that randomized controlled trials. And this is the only way, by comparing two populations, that you can know for sure if this drug made a positive effect or not. So these big studies are still ongoing with several drugs, and we are hopeful we will see some results in the next months.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mariangela. Dr. Sumia, few of our viewers are asking how many vaccine candidates are there in the Covax facility? Also, they're asking if WHO is coordinating those vaccine trials.
Yeah, so let me first explain the difference between Covax portfolio, which is, we sometimes use that to refer to the portfolio of vaccine candidates being supported by CEPI. I talked about the push funding, and there are about 9 candidates right now, 9 companies that are being supported by CEPI, but another 20 or so that are being considered for funding support. So that's purely for investments in the research side of things. Then I talked about Covax facility, which is going to be this big pooling mechanism for vaccines. Now there, basically, the facility is open to vaccines from all over the world. There is no restriction on who funded it or who developed it. What the vaccine needs to prove is that it is efficacious and safe, and that it meets the benchmarks that have been set by WHO and by the regulatory agencies like the FDA, the EMA, etc. So WHO has a big role here, obviously, because we will be asked to provide an opinion on whether a vaccine is ready for use, whether it can be pre-qualified or whether it can receive an emergency use authorization. And so we're preparing ourselves for the assessment of all of these vaccines that are going to start coming through once there are results. So there's an independent expert group that's being set up called the Independent Product Group that will advise Gavi and advise the facility on which vaccine candidates to invest in based on many criteria. One, of course, is the scientific data on the vaccine, but also things like what's going to be the potential price, how easy is it to scale up. There are some platforms, some technologies which are much easier to make in bulk than others. So that could be a criteria. The storage conditions, do you need a -20 or a -80, or can you store the vaccine at 2 to 8 degrees, which of course makes it much simpler for use in many countries. And so there will be these criteria that this committee will look at and advise Gavi on where those investments must go. And again, initially, there may be limited choice. There may be 1, 2, or 3 vaccines that are approved. But as time goes on, hopefully there will be more choice. There will be also a possibility to choose certain candidates for certain settings or certain age groups, etc. So as time goes on, I think this will be changing. But at the moment, it's going to be based on a clear set of criteria, and will be decided not by 1 or 2 people, but by an independent international expert advisory group that's now being set up exactly to advise on this.
Thank you very much. Viewers are always interested when an efficient vaccine will be available, and once we have it, if we have it, how it will be distributed equally, how it will come to the people who need to receive it first, as we are aware that we won't have enough doses at the beginning for everyone.
Yeah, that's a great question, because, I think many people think of the vaccine as a silver bullet that will arrive on the 1st of January and that will basically solve the world's problems. It's not going to work like that. We will start seeing the results of some of the trials, which are already now in phase 3, the advanced stage of the trials, by the end of this year or early in 2021. Then, it has to go through this process of evaluation and licensing. And then the scale up has to happen, the manufacturing, the shipping of the doses. We're looking at the middle of 2021, an optimistic scenario for a limited dose of vaccines to arrive in countries. And this is where the allocation framework that Mary Angela has been leading is very important, because I think countries and people need to recognize that the first doses of vaccine that become available, we must prioritize to whom that goes. The people who are at highest risk of getting the infection. And most people agree that frontline workers, including health workers and other essential workers, are those that might be the ones who first should get these vaccines. And then gradually, as you get more doses, you start covering the population. You first cover those who are at high risk, the elderly, those who have other diseases, which makes them at high risk, etc. Slowly, you start covering more and more of the population. That's going to take a couple of years. And before that, we need to continue the public health measures that we have shown to be effective now. So it's really important, I think, for people to know that when vaccines come, they will take time to be scaled up till everyone in the population, or at least till 60 or 70% of people get that immunity, which we talk about, the population or the herd immunity, which can really slow down transmission. We're not talking about eradicating the virus here. We're talking about reducing the kind of impact that it's currently having on society, on lives. And so that's going to take certainly up to 2022, to see that change happen. Until then, people have to be disciplined. I think that's really the only solution going forward.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Comment here very quickly, because I saw some questions on herd immunity on the chat on the side here. And I think there's a lot of misconception about herd immunity as well, because herd immunity is a term that's used to always referring to achieved by vaccine. It's not by immunization. And herd immunity to be achieved by natural infection, in the case of this SARS-CoV-2, would mean the death of countless people. We are not, WHO does not think we will achieve herd immunity without a huge life costs, without a vaccine. Okay, so when you're talking about herd immunity, we are talking in the context of immunization, not in the context of the natural history of the disease we've left unchecked.
Thank you very much for that clarification. We spoke about vaccines, we spoke about therapeutics, but we also have a pillar on diagnostics. So our viewers are asking, are there available and accessible quality tests, and what's the status of, do we have maybe some new diagnostics in pipeline?
There's a lot of innovation going on in the diagnostics area. And as all of us remember, at the beginning, we had very limited tests. It was RT-PCR test. You need specialized laboratories to do that. It's still the gold standard today. But today we are in a situation where there's been a lot of development, especially in the rapid tests, both rapid antigen tests, which tell you whether there is infection or not, and it can be done on a sample of the respiratory secretions, and also antibody tests, which tell you whether you've been exposed to the virus at some point. So the antibody tests are more useful for the public health authorities to assess, what proportion of their population has been exposed, and they can do it periodically to see, what's happening in the community. But it's the PCR tests and the antigen tests, and there's been a lot of progress. The price is coming down. It is possible that very soon we will have these tests available, even the paper-based tests, that people could even use for self-testing at home, and then they could have mass testing, where people are congregating or going to work and so on. And so I think the way we approach testing and our strategy is also changing and will change as these become available. So it's a very good point. And testing makes all the difference, because once you are able to detect somebody early in the stage of the infection, there's a much better chance that you can provide them the suitable care, monitor them, and prevent them from deteriorating and getting into severe problems. And that's one of the reasons now we are seeing much lower case fatality rates today than we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, when people were only tested when they were very sick and showing up in hospitals. Today it's the reverse. People are being tested so much more that many of them are asymptomatic or with very mild symptoms. But it helps to know, because two things. One, it makes sure that you don't get sick because you're doing the right things, that are doctor monitoring you. Secondly, it helps you to stay isolated. So you're cutting that chain of transmission. So the more people you can diagnose when they're infectious and isolate, the less the chances of onward transmission in the community. So I think a really important field, and definitely something that the Accelerator has been discussing a lot and putting a lot of thinking into.
Thank you very much, Dr. Soumya. Dr. Mariangela, do you have anything to add to this one?
No. Good, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are running out of time. I thank all our viewers for their great questions and for watching us from Scotland, Uganda, Canada, Nepal, Papua New Guinea, Bangladesh, Tanzania, the US, Haiti, South Africa, Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, Nigeria, France, Poland, India, Armenia, Turkey, Iran, Singapore, Sudan, Pakistan, and many more. I thank Dr. Soumya and Dr. Mariangela for their time and for taking all these great questions. Please follow our website or our social media channels for any updates on vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, and any other work that we are doing on COVID-19. Until next Wednesday, please stay safe.